my home church at some time this summer. My wife has gotten there a couple of times. But last Sabbath, I was speaking to a smaller group than this. It was just off the coast of Cuba. And there was probably about a dozen there, and less than half of them were Seventh-day Adventist. I was on a cruise ship for our 40th anniversary. And I put up a little note, Seventh-day Adventist and friends meet in the chapel at 10 o'clock. And I got a dozen people. So, I love sharing Jesus in the Bible. And our text just talked about something awesome, didn't it? Jesus is coming again. He came to this earth, he was born here to save us, right? He lived to save us. He died to save us. And he's coming again to save us. Oh, I love that. And Daniel 11 tells me more about his coming than any other prophecy in the Bible. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. And let's see if it'll get working here. Uh-oh. Oh, that's not. Click it. Pull my receiver in and out, the little receiver. There we go. All right. Daniel 11. We haven't spent an awful lot of time in the Seventh-day Adventist Church on Daniel 11. Think about if you've been to an Adventist school or evangelism. We talk about Daniel 2, we talk about Daniel 7, we talk about Daniel 8, we talk about Daniel 9. Don't say much about 10, 11, 12. However, 11, 12 are the prophecy for the time of the end. Just a little thought. If we're getting close to the time of the end, should we be paying attention to the prophecy for the time of the end? Yes. But it's traditional in the Adventist church to ignore it. I suggest it's not a good idea to follow tradition. It's better to follow Scripture, and it's in there, and it says it's the prophecy for the time of the end. Now, I can tell you that not everybody in the Seventh-day Adventist Church agrees on the understanding of, or the viewpoint of Daniel 11. There are three primary viewpoints. What I'm going to be sharing with you is the more recent one, which is the one growing in support. All right? So, I travel the world doing these seminars on Daniel 11. As the evangelist of the Idaho Conference, I do a 10-day evangelistic series on Daniel 11. It's called Islam and Christianity in Bible Prophecy. I was able to use that to make friends with a Muslim family in the airport in New Orleans this week. So that was kind of fun. But we know Daniel 2 and 7 pretty well, right? Yeah. Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, Rome, divided Rome with the little horn. You familiar with that? If you know that, you know who the king of the north is all the way through Daniel. Because those all invade Israel from the north. Really, it's not too hard. In Daniel 2 and 7, it talks about Babylon. And Jeremiah chapter 1 calls Babylon a kingdom of the north. Here's the issue, though. Babylon is way over here to the east. That's a desert in there. To get around the desert, they go up the Euphrates River and drop down on Israel and Jerusalem from the north. Now, here's the deal. The geography of Israel tells you why you have a king of the north, king of the south. If that's desert and that's water, what are the two land invasion routes? North and south. So in Daniel, you're going to have a king of the north, king of the south. It's not as hard as people have made it. All right? And, but by the time Daniel writes Daniel chapter 11, Babylon's already passed off the scene. So he talks about the Persians. He starts in Daniel 11:2 talking about Persia. And when Daniel says Persia, he actually means Persia. When he talks about Greece, he means Greece. Daniel uses place names literally. We've gotten confused trying to make some of Daniel's place names symbolic like Revelation uses them. Daniel uses them literally. Revelation uses them symbolically. Keep the writing styles in mind when you're interpreting them. All right? Jeremiah in chapter 50, verses 9 and following, calls the Medes and the Persians an assembly of great nations from the north that will conquer Babylon. They're from the north because when they occupy Israel, they come in from the north. They're the next king of the north. Then you have Alexander the Great come in Daniel 11, 2 and 3. And he comes in from the north. Then his empire splits 4 ways. But Daniel really only cares about 2 of those, north and south. We have the Seleucids to the north. We have the Ptolemies to the south. They fight back and forth. Can anybody tell me what city gets caught in the middle? Jerusalem. Okay, I did that with a smile on my face to illustrate this isn't that difficult. And from that time on, Jerusalem and God's people are caught in the middle in Daniel chapter 11. The New Covenant. Interestingly, I know a lot of Christians that say we're New Covenant believers, we don't need the Old Testament. That I find hilarious. Because the New Covenant is written in Jeremiah 31 in the Old Testament. And it is a new covenant with the house of Israel. That's why in Ephesians 2, when you and I as Gentiles accept Jesus Christ, we become citizens of the commonwealth of Israel. And if you're an Israelite, one of God's people, and New Covenant believer, guess where you're going to get caught? In the middle. Just like Jerusalem. Then Rome comes in from the north. And we find Jesus there in Daniel 11. With the force of a flood, this is 11:20 to 22, with the force of a flood they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. So Rome is in Daniel 11:20 to 22. But Jesus is right there in verse 22. Anybody happen to remember how many verses there are in Daniel 11? 45. Jesus dies for his people in verse 22. Where is that? Right in the middle. So Jesus dies for his people in the middle. He knows what it's like to get caught in the middle. And then he's with his people that are in the middle. And at the end of it, he rescues his people that are caught in the middle. There's more about Jesus in this than a lot of people may have anticipated. All right? So, my thought here is, what if you know all there is to know about Bible prophecy and you don't know Jesus? Could that be a problem? Huge problem. Jesus shows up and says, but who are you? I don't know you. That'd be bad. Suppose I only know enough about the Bible to know about Jesus, and I trust in him. And Jesus shows up and he says, welcome home, child. So the best thing is what? Number 1, to know Jesus. Number 2, know prophecy. Because what I learned from the prophecy that Jesus is coming soon. Amen. There is light at the end of this dark tunnel on this earth. And when the world is going crazy, Daniel 11 tells me it's not out of control. God has a plan for it. Now, when the Roman Empire splits, just like the Roman Empire, we get a north and just like the Greek Empire, we get a north and a south. We get a Christian north, led by the little horn, and we have a Muslim south. Can anybody tell me what city gets caught in the middle between those two powers?
Jerusalem. Many times.
But because we said everything was symbolic after the cross, a couple of our theologians, we've ignored all that. Meanwhile, it's been happening verse by verse exactly as predicted. You see, Uriah Smith said everything was literal. Louis Weir and Hans Laurendale in the 1900s said, no, it's all symbolic. Can anybody remember what Jesus did in Matthew 24 talking about the fall of Jerusalem after the cross? Was it going to be a literal fall of Jerusalem? 70 AD, after the cross, it's very literal. That would match Uriah Smith. But then Jesus goes on to say that his people all over the world would be caught in this persecution. That's a globalized religious application. So what if we follow Jesus and after the cross, it stays literal, but it also has a global application? Well, we've got people in the church that say it's all literal and it's all symbolic. Well, so let's do both, since Jesus said both. Now, I find that just really simple, but there are a bunch of theologians in this church that have a problem with doing it both ways. There's a growing number of theologians that are agreeing with it. And there's a yearly Daniel 11 conference in Berrien Springs now dealing with this issue, and we've got more and more of them coming in agreement. So it's kind of fun to watch. But you would agree that Jerusalem gets caught in the middle, right? But let's show you the globalized application. The Sabbath, the day of worship. For the land of Israel, the seventh-day Sabbath, right? Okay. But remember, God's people, His new covenant people, are called His Israel. And the new covenant, God writes His law in our hearts and in our minds. Would that happen to include the Sabbath? Oh, it would. But the king of the north, the papal system, did not want to be called Israelite or Jewish, so they changed the day of worship from Sabbath to Sunday. The king of the south, Islam, with Muhammad, they didn't want to be called Israelite or Jewish, changed the day of worship from Sabbath to Friday. Hey, where did God's Sabbath keepers just get caught? I'm telling you, Daniel 11 is really not that difficult. It doesn't matter where in the world you go. If you are a Sabbath keeper, one or both of those are going to be mad at you. If you're in the Philippines, the northern islands are controlled by the Catholics. The southern islands are controlled by the radical Muslims. Where can a Sabbath keeper get in trouble? Anywhere. I've not been to Egypt yet. But I went in the northeastern Nigeria. They took my wife and I in and out in hiding. I was on the plane on Ethiopian Airlines on the way in. I was talking to a guy from the U.S. State Department. He said, whatever you do, don't go past Jos. That's the fault line. Because Boko Haram and radical Muslims have control of the northern part of Nigeria. And so I'm in this SUV traveling at a very high rate of speed to make it hard to hit. And tinted windows because there are two Caucasians in the back seat and two Africans in the front where they can be seen. And the words of this State Department guy, don't go past Jos. I saw the city of Jos go by. And I said, hey, how far are we from our destination? Oh, about an hour or two. Don't go by Jos. Okay. I was preaching to 2,000 people that Sabbath. And they told me not to step out of the church. I'd been preaching quietly, teaching 100 Adventist pastors for several days before that. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere without an escort. They had us in what they called a safe house. It had concrete walls around it, razor wire. Had deadbolts. You got a deadbolt on your house? I bet you not like this one. It goes both ways and up and down when you turn it, all four ways. There's a deadbolt at the front door. Well, there's a guard and a lock on the gate too. But there's a deadbolt at the front door. You get into the foyer. There's a deadbolt to get out of the foyer into the house. There's a deadbolt at the bottom of the steps. There's a deadbolt at the top of the steps. There's a deadbolt on my bedroom, and there's a deadbolt like that in my bathroom. They've got to waste quite a few hand grenades to get to me. It's an interesting place. And what he said about wanting to kiss the ground when you get back, there are times. But I was preaching that Sabbath. I did some Sabbath school, and I wanted to step outside for some fresh air between Sabbath school and church. I stepped outside. I came right back in. Because at the back side door, off the pulpit, I stepped outside and there's a man with a machine gun standing there facing out. Well-used one. I came back in, realizing that they weren't kidding. This whole world isn't the same. In Nigeria, radical Islam has the north. Sunday-keeping Christians have the south. Where can a Sabbath keeper get in trouble? Anywhere. Oh, it's gone. Now, let me illustrate it another way. Whenever the papacy has Israel, they have control of the global church as well. In Daniel 11, it's both ways, remember? So during the Crusades, they have control of Jerusalem. They also have control of Christianity. During the second conflict, there are 3 of them in Daniel 11. By the way, there are 3 in Revelation 2. They're called the 3 woes. The second conflict is the Ottoman, and the Reformation is during that time. According to Daniel 11, the papacy lost control of Jerusalem, and because of the Reformation, they lost control of the church. At the time of the end, the prophecy says they once again get control of Israel and Jerusalem, and they once again get control of the church. Notice, Israel and Jerusalem are an acted out parable of what's happening in globalized Christianity with the followers of God's Israel. Daniel is a master at this. So which is it? Literal or spiritual? And I'm saying both. Now you can graph this conflict out. We have Arab Islam and up through the Crusades. Then we have the Ottoman conflict, and we have the time of the end conflict. And those are your 3 conflicts. Let's take a look at the third one, because I don't have a lot of time with you today. At the time of the end, the king of the south, I believe that to be Islam, shall attack him, the king of the north, the papacy. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. He shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. Notice, it's like a whirlwind. The third conflict will be much shorter than the first 2. And the military language, he enters, overwhelms, and passes through. That's relatively quick. He shall also enter the glorious land, that's Israel. And many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand. Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. That happens to be western Jordan today. He shall stretch his hand out against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. I'm just crazy enough to think Egypt still means Egypt. Because nowhere in Daniel does he ever do it any differently. They say only in this place he does it differently, but I think, if he does it consistently all through the chapter, the whole book, he means what he says here. The land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. Okay, tell me, what do Western Jordan, Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia have in common? Secularism, communism, atheism, or Islam? Islam. It's pretty clear when you look at it. Now, so I see a 3-way split of Islam coming on. Radical Islam will fall. Egypt and many countries. I'm watching for Egypt to radicalize right now. And it's really, really close. You were just there. Are the young people in love with their government? No, not at all. If you have all your young people really, really, really hating your government, is there an issue coming on? Yeah. So radical Islam's going to go down. Moderate Islam's going to follow papal-led Christianity, but there's going to be a group of Muslims who escape. And the only way to escape at the time of the end is by following Jesus Christ. When all the world either follows the beast or they're in the Lamb's Book of Life, there is a group of Muslims that escape. And those Muslims and those Christians will join together that are true to God, a remnant that are true to Jesus and the Bible, and they will proclaim the loud cry. Give you a little idea of where we're going with this. All right. Back in 2011, when I started as evangelist for the Idaho Conference, was just after my book came out. And in that book in 2011, I had some expectations. Based on Daniel 11, there would be radical Islam would anger the papacy. The papacy would call for war against radical Islam. They had not done that since the Ottoman Empire. The United States and its allies would be the military enforcer for the papacy. Revelation 13, all right? Radical Islam would be overthrown, moderate Islam would follow the papacy, and of course, there's that group I talked about that would actually follow Jesus. So there's really 6 things. That was all future when I wrote the book. It's no longer future. And what most people, even most Adventists, don't know is that we have been watching prophecy unrolling in front of our eyes, and most people don't even know it. Let's take a look at how that's been happening. July 1, 2014. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the self-proclaimed leader of the Islamic State stretching across Iraq and Syria, has vowed to lead the conquest of Rome as he called on Muslims to immigrate to his new land to fight under its banner around the globe. For the first time since the Ottoman Empire, we had a functioning caliphate. This is day 1 of their existence. He says this. He makes this call. Did you notice what his target was on day 1? Rome. Daniel 11, at the time of the end, the king of the south will push against the king of the north. Now, you may not know what a caliph is. You know what a pope is? A pope is a Christian leader that considers himself both a political and a religious leader. A caliph is a Muslim leader who considers himself both a political and a religious leader. King of the north, king of the south. They are an awful lot alike. They both claim they're going to rule the world. There is not room for both of these guys on the same planet. Every time we have a caliphate, we have a holy war. Do you know what a definition of a holy war is? When both sides act like the devil in the name of God. And when you act like the devil, you happen to be of the devil. All right? That's why so many people in this world don't like religion, because of all these holy wars in history. So day 1, I couldn't make this up. Day 1, when we have a caliphate, their goal is to conquer Rome. How long would it take the Pope to call for war? It took 5.5 weeks. Most of the world doesn't know that the Pope called for war, but he did. Oh, the Muslims know he did. But most of the Christians didn't pay attention. Pope Francis appealed to world leaders on Thursday to help end the crisis in northern Iraq after a sweeping advance by radical Islamic State militants forced thousands of residents of Iraq's biggest Christian town to flee their homes. His Holiness addresses an urgent appeal to the international community to take action to end the humanitarian tragedy now underway. I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan on August 7th. I was waiting for that comment because Daniel 11 told me it was coming. And when he said it, I was at my booth at an ASI convention where I have an exhibit on Daniel 11 seminars. And Seventh-day Adventists didn't care because it wasn't on their screen. They ignored Daniel 11. I tried to share it with several people, they didn't care. Down the line from my booth was a guy sitting there in his booth. Robert Falkenberg Sr., share him, booth. And there was a time when neither of us had anything going. I walked over there and I said, Elder Falkenberg, can I talk to you? And he said, sure, have a seat. And I shared with him about what was going on that day in Bible prophecy. And he instantly bought a whole bunch of, instantly, within a week, bought a whole bunch of our material and started sharing it all over the general conference and other places. And to the day of his death, he was doing everything he could to advance this ministry and this understanding. But very few people picked up on it. He was open-minded enough to see what was going on. The very next day, Obama says the United States is coming to help. Within 36 hours of the papal call for action, the U.S. began to bomb the Islamic State, which the U.S. had never bombed before. So let's see. Islam will push against the King of the North, the papacy, the Pope will call for war, and the U.S. will supply the military power. Man, that happened all within 6 weeks. It's the only one of the three viewpoints in Daniel 11 in the Adventist Church that's having things fulfilled as expected. If it's true that this is what's going on. The Pope calls for war and the U.S. gives the backing. We're entering this third conflict that should be relatively short, which is followed by the loud cry in the close of probation. Maybe that context would get your attention. What this last conflict is the wake-up call for God's people to get ready for what they're supposed to be doing. Because what follows it is the greatest evangelistic opportunity of all time. It's supposed to be waking us up. The Holy See's ambassador to the United Nations, Silvano Tomasi, this weekend supported U.S. airstrikes aimed at halting the advance of Sunni Islamic State militants, calling for intervention now before it's too late. While the Vatican vocally disapproved of the U.S.-led campaign in Iraq in 2003 and the 2013 plan for airstrikes on Syria, fearing both might make the situation worse for Christians on the ground, fears of ethnic cleansing by Islamists has forced a policy change. What forced the papacy to go from the man of peace to call for war? Islamists, the caliphate supporters, Islamist means caliphate supporters, that were pushing at them. That's exactly what Daniel said to watch for. And then, Jihadi John, one of the Islamic State guys, terrorists that was cutting people's heads off for YouTube videos, he says to Obama, the dog of Rome. Why would Obama in the United States be the dog of Rome? Let's see, the Pope says sick 'em and the U.S. bites within 36 hours. Get this. Radical Islam believes the United States is the military enforcer for the papacy, but most Seventh-day Adventists haven't seen it yet, even though we've been saying it for over 100 years. Because we haven't been paying attention to Daniel 11. It's already in motion. In an unusually blunt endorsement of military action, the Vatican's top diplomat at the United Nations in Geneva has called for a coordinated international force to stop the so-called Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. He said the joint statement originated with Russia, which traditionally sees itself as the protector of Orthodox Christians in the Middle East. Seventh-day Adventist theologians are still talking about Russia being an atheistic power. No, they're not. Putin considers himself as the defender of Orthodox Christianity in the Middle East. This is a holy war, and he hates radical Islam. He will work with Muslims, but he hates radical Islam. So does Trump. Now notice, what brought both the United States and Russia to work with the papacy? Radical Islam. Third and final conflict. How much of the world follows the Pope at the final conflict? And all the world? Let's see. At the Crusades, the world followed the Pope because they were afraid of Islam. At the time of the Ottomans, they followed the Pope because they're afraid of Islam. At the time of the end, they follow the Pope because they're afraid of Islam. Daniel's not that hard. Pope Francis wants to be president of the world, but shrewdly and methodically and with a showman's flair, the soft-spoken 78-year-old Argentinian Jesuit priest named Pope Francis showed Thursday that he is running to become president of the planet, and they were ready to endorse him. Oh yeah, every time radical Islam gets powerful, so does the papacy. I don't think this wave can stop, said Sonia Licht of the International Center for Democratic Transition. The global north must be prepared that the global south is on the move. The entire global south. This is not just a problem for Europe, but for the whole world. And with all this stuff, we have this immigration push in Europe from North Africa and the Middle East. Muslims flooding Europe. And the whole world is getting pushed. And Daniel says the south will push against the north. It's happening in front of our eyes. And about this time, we have a United States presidential election that begins to heat up. And one of those guys starts talking about building a wall on the southern border. Trump. In a town hall meeting, he said this about radical Islam. The point is, they want to do serious harm. We have to take them out. We have to take them out very, very swiftly and viciously if necessary. We've got to destroy the brand of jihad. When he said that, I'm thinking Daniel 11, it's like a whirlwind. Very, very swiftly and viciously sounds like a whirlwind. I thought, man, if he'd win, maybe Daniel 11 would be fulfilled. But there's no way that guy's going to win. Except he did. In his inauguration address, look what he said. We will reinforce old alliances and form new ones and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. And that's exactly what some of us were expecting. And he's still out to do that. Look where he goes on his first foreign trip. Saudi Arabia, where the king of the south comes from, Israel, the one caught in the middle, and the Vatican, where the king of the north comes from. The visit to Saudi Arabia, he said, will include a truly historic gathering in Saudi Arabia with leaders from all across the Muslim world. We will begin to reconstruct a new foundation of cooperation and support with our Muslim allies to combat extremism, terrorism, and violence. He's going to take down radical Islam, working together with moderate Islam, just like Daniel 11 said. Doesn't make me doubt Daniel 11, I'll tell you that. Then he says he's going to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and move the U.S. embassy there. Boy, that causes all kinds of trouble. Within a week, there's a meeting in Turkey of the Muslim nations that are upset with his announcement. This is in Turkey. Soleimani, commander of the Al-Quds force, says his nation is ready to support Palestinian forces in the Gaza Strip days after the U.S. recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. There's a lot in that paragraph. Number one, Soleimani is commander of the Iranian Al-Quds force. He's a Shiite, and he's given military support to the Sunnis in Gaza. Something big is going on there. He's commander of the Al-Quds force. The Al-Quds force is their special forces trained to fight outside of Iran. The reason they're trained to fight outside of Iran and named Al-Quds Force is they believe that the final capital, worldwide capital of Islam will be in the city of Al-Quds, and it's not in Iran. So their Al-Quds Force is the force that's designed to set up the capital for the final caliphate. How many of you know where that city is? Got one. Where is it?
Jerusalem.
It's Jerusalem. Get an idea why Israel doesn't like Iran? Their special forces are named the Jerusalem Brigade. And they keep saying they're going to wipe Israel off the face of the map. But I want you to show you something. It's not just Bloomberg, it's almost all the media outlets. They will talk about Al-Quds, they will talk about Jerusalem, even in the same paragraph, and they won't tell you it's the same place. That's why you don't know. Because if the world knew, they'd know how short the fuse is. And interestingly, I don't have time to get into this, but the political left and atheism are giving cover to Islam. And the political left is what's doing that in that news stuff. Okay. Soleimani spoke a day after the head of Lebanon's Hezbollah movement, Hassan Nasrallah, called on all resistance groups in the region to come back with a unified strategy to take back Jerusalem, Al-Quds, because that's where they want the worldwide capital of Islam. Daniel says, what city gets caught in the middle? But so do you as a Sabbath keeper get caught in the middle. Have you ever heard that someday the day of worship would be a sign of which side you're on? Folks, it already is. Are you following the king of the north, the king of the south, or the king of all, the king of kings? Well, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia said some interesting things, because I used to say, well, radical Islam's going to be wiped out, moderate Islam will follow papacy, and people always ask me for a definition. I struggled with that. I said I know it when I see it, but it's hard for me to explain. He came up with a definition that's really simple, and it works. He calls it the triangle of evil. Saudi Arabia's powerful crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has described Turkey as part of a triangle of evil, along with Iran and hardline Islamist groups. The Saudi prince also accused Turkey of trying to reinstate the Islamic Caliphate, abolished nearly a century ago when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. Here's your definition. Muslims that want to reestablish the Caliphate by force in Jerusalem are radicals. Moderates are willing to work together with the rest of the world to stop them. So Islamists mean somebody who wants to establish a caliphate by force. And Iran and Turkey as nations want to do that. At least their leaders do. Going on in the Atlantic, still the Crown Prince. In this triangle, they are trying to promote the idea that our duty as Muslims is to reestablish the caliphate, that the glory of Islam is in building an empire by force. We have no duty anymore to fight to spread Islam, but in the triangle of evil, they want to manipulate Muslims to tell them that their duty as Muslims requires the establishment of a Muslim empire. I believe the Palestinians and the Israelis have a right to have their own land, but we have to have a peace agreement to assure the stability for everyone to have normal relations. That was an earth-shaking comment. The leader of Saudi Arabia says Israel has a right to exist, to have their own land. Remember, Iran wants to take them down. Saudi Arabia is now ready to work together with Israel to stop Iran and Turkey. Daniel's three-way split of Islam is in progress right in front of our eyes. USA opens the embassy on May 14, 2018. Does anybody know why that was such an important date? It happened to be the 70th anniversary to the day of the founding of the nation of Israel in 1948. So 70 years after the founding of Israel, Trump says, Jerusalem is yours. What did your Sabbath school lesson just talk about? 70 years. Look at this temple coin. There's a group in Israel that is ready to rebuild the temple at a moment's notice, at least the tent tabernacle. And they have priests trained. They have everything ready to roll. The temple coin, or the temple shekel, look at the faces they have for their coin. Cyrus the Great, after 70 years of captivity, he said, Jerusalem is yours, and they rebuild the temple. After 70 years of statehood, Trump says, Jerusalem is yours, and they expect to rebuild the temple. Is there anybody in the U.S. that is trying to get rid of Trump as president?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he could go down by all kinds of ways, including assassination. Or he could get tired and quit. That doesn't seem likely. He seems to enjoy this too much. But if he does go down, that would make Michael Pence president, right? Who believes in rebuilding the temple on the Temple Mount. It just gets even more interesting. We live in a very interesting time. Trump warned Iran's president, threaten us and you will suffer like few have ever suffered in history. That was their response. That's Soleimani, the commander of the Al-Quds force. He's got a radio in his hand. He claims to have over 1,000 cells of terrorists in the United States waiting to go. He's called in an attack on the White House. The U.S. flag is flying. That's Farsi, but there's a little bit of English. It says, we will crush the USA under our feet. That was their response. That's been a back and forth game ever since. Then al-Baghdadi was finally killed in October. I mean, he'd been killed 5 or 6 times already. Both the United States and Russia had killed him several times. But this time, they got him. And the Islamic State got a new caliph, the professor they call him. So what's next? Is it all done? I don't think so. I think what you saw is the warm-up, a little bit of a warning. Because Turkey and Iran both want to take the place as the caliph. We're in an end-time caliphate push. We're there now. It's likely to expand. And by the way, the Islamic State itself is expanding underground. So I see us right in here. What comes next? Well, Daniel tells us. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. So something's going to anger the papacy. He's going to set up his headquarters in or near Jerusalem. And then he goes down, and nobody can help him. That's when God takes care of it. Now, tidings from the east and tidings from the north. Have you ever heard in Revelation how God says, come out of her, my people, out of Babylon? Mm-hmm. Babylon is what direction invasion-wise? Invasion-wise, it's the north. It's the original king of the north. Revelation uses the term Babylon to talk about the end-time king of the north, the papacy. Isn't that interesting? Then, so God has a remnant that comes out of the north and says, oh, the papal traditions aren't right. You've got to follow Jesus in the Bible. But it says out of the east and the north. Edom, Moab, and Ammon, those people that escape, are to the east of Jerusalem. So God pulls a remnant out of Islam, He pulls a remnant out of Christianity, and together they proclaim Jesus in the Bible. And folks, that's happening too. All over the Muslim world, by the hundreds of thousands, Muslims are accepting Jesus as their Lord and Savior and the Bible as their authority. Oh, they're not calling themselves Christians or Seventh-day Adventists. Some of them are calling themselves Seventh-day Adventists, but even that's dangerous. If I was in Egypt right now, I would not claim to be a Christian. I wouldn't. Do you know why? Because when a Muslim hears Christian, that means a follower of the Pope, a crusader. I am not a follower of the Pope. I use a different term. I'm a follower of Jesus and the book. You see, in the Quran it says there are true people of the book, the Bible. That's my definition. When I walk into a mosque, and I often do, it's a little nerve-wracking. Because I'm going in to talk to them about this. I can usually make friends with them in about 5 to 10 minutes with this. And unless it's a radical mosque, and that doesn't work so well. And I've only had one of those.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. But God has a remnant out of Islam and Christianity that come together to follow Jesus. Friends, that's a powerful thing. And see, I have a friend that I meet with once a year. And he has an underground movement in Muslim countries. And he's got somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million believers in his movement. They don't call themselves Christian. They call themselves Muslims. They're playing with words. Muslim means surrendered to God. They said we're more surrendered than ever. We're followers of Isa and the book. Remember in the Quran it says they're people of the book to be respected. They said that's us. We're more surrendered to God than ever. And these guys are getting away with preaching Jesus and the Bible in mosques all across radical Muslim territories. And like I said, he's got somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million. And man, I could tell you some stories, but I shouldn't. And he's now very interested in Daniel 11. This summer, in one of his countries, major things were going on, and he sat down with me, and he peppered me with questions for an hour, based on Daniel 11. What do you expect in this country, this country, this country, and with what's going on? And I said, remember, I'm human, I could be wrong. It gets really scary when people's lives are on the line with your answers. And I laid down what I would expect in those countries based on Daniel 11. And one of them has already made major moves in harmony with what was expected. I'm telling you, I believe Daniel 11 is the prophecy for the end time. And when you see this world going crazy, it's right on track. We're looking at the greatest evangelistic opportunity of all time. Radical Islam is down. Moderate Islam is pretending to follow Jesus in the Bible. Who's there to stop the spread of the real thing? Nobody. And the whole world has just watched a prophecy be fulfilled in front of their eyes. We've got a greater chance than ever to share the gospel. Now I'm going to very quickly hit Ellen White. Ellen White, one of the 3 major founders of the church. If you're Adventist, you want to know what did Ellen White have to say about it. The truth is, not much. When I started Daniel 11, I looked at what she had to say, found there was nothing really there, ignored it for 6 years. Then I wondered, after I'd really understood Daniel 11, if I read her stuff, I might see something differently now. Ooh, yeah. Now that I understood the Bible better, some of her comments that didn't make sense to me now grab my attention. I've been told by some Adventists that if Ellen White didn't explain a final conflict between Islam and Christianity, then it has no importance. Oh, really? That means if the Bible says something, I can't believe it unless Ellen White says it? You know, she always said she was a lesser light leading to the greater light. Now, get what she really did say. The time has come for Daniel to stand in his lot. Okay, she's talking about Daniel, right? Right at the end, Daniel becomes crucially important. Anybody know where that phrase comes from in the book of Daniel? Daniel 12. You know the Daniel 11:12 prophecy we ignore a lot? The time has come for Daniel to stand in his lot, the last part of Daniel. The time has come for the light given him to go to the world as never before. If those for whom the Lord had done so much will walk in the light, their knowledge of Christ and the prophecies relating to him will be greatly increased as they near the close of this earth's history. She says this in 1899. Was this future or past? It was still future. Oh, she'd already written the book Great Controversy. The pioneers had already laid down their understanding. And she says there's something in that last part of Daniel that is going to have great increase of understanding right at the end. It's not going to be in her writings. It's not going to be in the writings of the pioneers. Do you know what she's doing? Even from the grave, she's a lesser light leading to the greater, lesser light to the greater in that statement. She said, I was shown the inhabitants of the earth. This is another one. In the utmost confusion, war, bloodshed, privation, want, famine, and pestilence were abroad in the land. As these things surrounded God's people, they began to press together. Suffering, perplexity, privation caused reason to resume its throne. There seemed to be a little time of peace. What is God going to have to do to get his people's attention to make them reasonable? He's going to have to take away their stuff, right? You've seen places without all that stuff. Over 30% of Egyptians are living in poverty. And their leadership are building palaces. They're not happy. So, God's going to take away our stuff to get our attention. I have a suggestion. Do you like your stuff? Especially, this is for those of you who might like your stuff. You better start using it to share the gospel or you're going to lose it. All right? That's just an observation off of this thing. Just, it's what it's saying. There seemed to be a little time of peace. There's a time of war, gets everybody's attention, gets God's people's attention. Then there's a little time of peace for them to share the loud cry. Then, once more, the inhabitants of the earth were presented before me. And again, everything was in utmost confusion. Strife, war, and bloodshed with famine and pestilence raged everywhere. Other nations were engaged in this war in confusion. And then men's hearts failed them for fear. That's when Jesus comes. Now, I want you to notice something. A time of war that gets their attention. The loud cry, and another time of war and trouble, and then Jesus comes. The 7 last plagues at the Battle of Armageddon. That's Daniel 11 pattern that she's talking about. Then this one got me. The God who gave Daniel instruction regarding the closing scenes of this earth's history will certainly confirm the testimony of his servants as at the appointed time they give the loud cry. All the messages given from 1840 to 44 are to be made forcible now. I want you to notice the loud cry has just been linked with Daniel and with 1840 to 44. For there are many people who have lost their bearings. Oh, is that ever true? The messages are to go to all the churches. The message was given, and there should be no delay in repeating the message, for the signs of the times are fulfilling. It's happening in front of your eyes, and I've showed you Daniel 11 is happening before eyes, and people are ignoring it. It's time to see it. The closing work must be done. A great work will be done in there's a short time when God's people become reasonable, the loud cry. A message will soon be given by God's appointment that will swell into a loud cry. Then Daniel will, that's that last part of Daniel, and to give his testimony. Right at the end, there's something in Daniel that comes to life. I think I know what it is. What does she mean, 1840 to 44? Oh, she says, at the very time specified, Turkey, which is Islamic, she's talking about Josiah Litch predicting the fall of the Ottoman Empire on August 11, 1840. And it happens, it becomes a protectorate then. Through her ambassadors, accepted the protection of the Allied powers of Europe, and thus placed herself under the control of the Christian nations. The event exactly fulfilled the prediction. When it became known, Multitudes were convinced of the correctness of the principles of prophetic interpretation adopted by Miller and his associates, and a wonderful impetus or power was given to the Advent movement. Men of learning and position united with Miller both in preaching and in publishing his views. Notice it wasn't until after August 11, 1840 that the power was given and learning and positioned men joined the group. And from 1840 to 44, the work rapidly extended. What was it in 1840 that kicked off the Millerite movement with power? The fall of Islam. So let's take a look. We have a prophecy about Islam fulfilled, 1840, leads to a prophetic movement called the Millerite movement. They proclaim the judgment and the coming of Jesus, but Jesus does not come. Revelation 10 said that that would be sweet as honey, but turn bitter. And that they would have to go do it all over again. Ellen White is saying the same thing. It's going to be a repeat of 1840 to 44. You have a fall of Islam. You have a prophetic movement, the loud cry, that proclaims the close of the judgment, and Jesus does come. Is that a repeat? Notice, God uses a fall of Islam to get the attention at the start of the judgment, and uses a fall of Islam to get the world's attention at the close of the judgment. It is consistent. God's patterns are always there. So I think it's actually time to take the Bible seriously and study Daniel 11 and 12. We live in a world that's unlike anything ever in history. And it's changing rapidly. But the good news is, the prophecies are still there telling us it's still on track. People have been waiting for the day of worship to be a sign of which side it already is. I'm telling you, don't wait. It's already that. Also, it's time to share with others. I mean, all I have for materials with me today are these little tracts. If you want some, I'll happily share some. I love sharing them with Muslim family, like I said the other day in New Orleans. I was on it. Just give me this little bit of time for a story. It's about Idaho. I was on a plane, getting on a plane in Las Vegas. I'm a Southwest frequent flyer. I get on very early. I don't even have to pre-register or whatever, or check in. They just automatically give me one of the early seats. In the last 30 days, I was flying 14 of them. I get on, I have a seat, and my wife and I are together, and we have this thing. Southwest, you know, there's no assigned seats. You just get on, pick the seat you want. We're early, we get to pick a seat up towards the front. She sits by the window, I sit in the aisle seat, leaving an empty seat between us. I've already put my stuff under the center seat. In case it's full and I need to move, I will. Otherwise, I like a little room. And so I'm sitting there, and I'd seen a lady in the airport carrying around a little glass box with a crown in it, with a piece of cloth wrapped around it. Okay. I was curious what was in it, but didn't want to walk up to the lady and ask. So I'm sitting there at the center aisle, and here comes this lady, about early 20s, with the little glass box, walking down the aisle of the airplane. She stops by our row, and she says, "Is that center seat taken?" I said, well, you can have this one, and I just move over and give her the aisle seat. I said, under one condition, you tell me what's in that box. She laughed, put the box under the seat in front of her, and proceeded to tell me that she's on her way home from the Miss USA pageant, and she's Miss Idaho. And we talked for a while, and I got out my computer, and I was working on some of this stuff. And she's looking out of the corner of her eye, and she says, "Sir, I shouldn't be looking at your computer screen, but are you a teacher or something?" I said, "Well, I do prophecy seminars, Islam and Christianity." And she asked me a couple of questions. And I looked at Miss Idaho. And I said, "You wouldn't happen to be a Muslim, would you?" And she said, "Yes, I am." I didn't see that one coming. And we had a really good talk. You see, she doesn't like a lot of what she sees in Islam. All the stuff going on in the Middle East. If Islam is a religion of peace, why all the trouble? But if Christianity's so good, why all the trouble? Man, I have good news for people like that. You know, God agrees. There's a lot of trouble on both sides, but God's got a people out of Islam, a group of people out of Christianity that are going to come together and love people like Jesus wants us to love people. There are people who say, is the God of Islam and the God of Christianity the same? Don't ever answer that with a yes or a no. Here's your answer. Jesus said that his true disciples would love their enemies and do good to those that hate them. During the Crusades, which side did that? Neither. So here's your answer. There are many Christians and many Muslims who are worshiping the same false god of force, fear, and anger. Do it our way or else. But there are some Christians and some Muslims who have found or are in search of the same true God of love, truth, peace, and forgiveness. And God is in the process of bringing those together. Muslims and Christians all over the world are getting fed up with the systems that they're in. Why are we so quiet? We've got the answer. There is an answer. There is a God of love, truth, peace, and forgiveness. And he loves people from all sides. And you know what happens if you follow that God of love, truth, peace, and forgiveness? The king of the north will hate you and the king of the south will hate you. You get caught in the... But the king of the south goes down, then the king of the north goes down, and the only people left standing are those following Jesus Christ. That's why we have this prophecy, to give us the courage to start speaking up and take a stand in the middle, because we know that's the only good place to be. Ellen White said it this way: the third angel's message is swelling into a loud cry, and you must not feel at liberty to neglect the present duty and still entertain the idea that at some future time you will be the recipient of great blessing when without any effort on your part a wonderful revival will take place. Prophecy is happening right in front of us, and most people are still sleeping on and ignoring it. Today you are to give yourself to God, that you may be emptied of self, emptied of envy, jealousy, evil surmising, strife, everything that shall be dishonoring to God. Wow, just think how nice your life would be if you did that. Think how nice the life of those around you would be if you did that. Boy, we could really reach the world if we did that. I think it's time to do that. Spend time praying for those around you, and that the Holy Spirit will be poured out in your life to actually clean you up to be what you need to be. So yep, I think we're right in here. Huh. Right there. It's on the back wall still. And we have the loud cry. I'm looking forward to that. I love sharing Jesus and the Bible with people, don't you? Are you doing it? Because if you're not doing it now, you probably won't then. And then we go home. That's really good news. So, I love Daniel 11. There's my website. You can go on there. It has only Bible and history on it. If you want to see anything related to mine that has Ellen White on it, you go to sealingtime.com. All right? They have the Ellen G. White stuff. I do not have any Ellen White on my website. You know why? I'm dealing with the real world all the time. Not Adventist. And I can only use Scripture and history. And that's okay. Hey, pray for me. I discovered something on this last cruise trip. This is our 40th anniversary. I was talking to their entertainment director, and he gave me a website address of a group in Florida that lines up entertainers and educational speakers for cruise ships. And I talked to the owner of that company yesterday, and he told me how to do things to get on their list to go, and, you know, I get to go on free cruises if that works, and I just have to share what I care about all the time, and I get a free cruise out of it? I wouldn't mind. That's how I want to spend my vacation time. And I said, well, you have to know what it is before I go any further. He says, I said, it may be too politically incorrect for you. And I gave an idea, and he said, that might work in the Mediterranean cruises, because that's the history all around it. Hey, this might be fun. Folks, we've got to look for ways to reach people. I already know on a cruise, People sit down and say, where are you from? What do you do for your work? And I have these in my pocket. Because when I say I present on Islam and Christianity Bible prophecy, they say, what? And it gets interesting in a hurry. Folks, we're living in a world that God gave us an opportunity to reach them if we'll take advantage of it. And it's in the prophecy. So let's close with our closing song. I've gone long enough on you. If you have questions, ask me afterwards.